Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. We've got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing a Gothenburg beer. Just a bit of a tradition on the channel these days, as you know if you've watched for any period of time. But for this review we're going to return to a brewery that you've seen me review many things from before. They're one of the more established names in Swedish craft beer, and they're also one of my personal favourites as well, and this is a beer that I think will highlight what this brewery is all about. So for this review then we are going to head out to Landvetter, to the east of the city, quite close to the airport, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Bryggeri once again, and this one I think should be very interesting. This is another member of their Future series, which is their barrel aging program. It's called the Cognac and Coffee. It comes in at 12.5% ABV. It's an Imperial Stout, or to be specific, it is a Cognac barrel aged Imperial Coffee Stout. So yeah, this one I think will be a little bit of a beast. This beer was released in November of 2020 as part of the Tillfällig assortment through Systembolaget. This one was originally brewed along with Punch Praline, which you saw me review a few videos ago, as part of the 12% beer project over in Connecticut in America. But Dugas apparently liked this beer so much that they decided to brew these two in Gothenburg and release them through Systembolaget for the Swedish market as well. So quite cool that I'm able to review both of these beers for you here on the channel. As I've told you before, when it comes to Dugas, these guys are awesome with Imperial Stouts, particularly coffee stouts in my opinion. I based that opinion on the Key and the Sidamo Dim 2 that I reviewed a few years back. Those were the two beers that really opened up my mind to Imperial coffee stouts. I don't drink coffee normally, but you know, those two beers really showed me the kind of complexities that coffee beans could add to beers. They're one of the most interesting adjuncts I think that you can add into Imperial Stouts, and I've had some really interesting coffee IPAs recently as well. But yeah, I would always credit Dugas with having opened my mind to what coffee in beer can actually do. This beer is also interesting from the perspective as well that it's got Cognac barrel aging. That's not something you see very often when it comes to craft beer. As we know, Cognac is a type of brandy, and brandy is a distillate of wine. So yeah, not too often that you'll come across a Cognac barrel aged beer, and especially so when it's got some different coffee and things in it as well. So I think this will be one of the more really interesting beers that we've had from Dugas. We've had some great beers from these guys over the years, but I have to say I do have very high hopes for this one. So very much looking forward to tasting this one, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So let's see how we get on. The Dugas Bryggeri Cognac and Coffee, 12.5% Cognac barrel aged Imperial Coffee Stout. You know, a little bit of a mouthful, but I'm sure it will be worth it. So as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Dugas Bryggeri before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the fairly near future. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you, and that's constantly being added to. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Dugas Bryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So as I've mentioned to you already, Dugas Bryggeri are based in Landvetter, on the outskirts of Gothenburg in Sweden, very close to Gothenburg Landvetter Airport, but the brewery was established a good few years ago, back in 2005 in Mölndal to the south of the city by Mikael Engström Duge, whom of course it takes its name from, Dugas Bryggeri. But a few years prior to this, Mikael had met an Englishman who was selling different second-hand breweries around Sweden, and this really got him thinking about brewing his own beer. So he studied the Swedish alcohol laws, which were admittedly very complex, they still are to this day, but he visited various other breweries breweries, and he started buying up his own equipment to put together his brewery, which culminated in the opening of the first Dugas Bryggeri in Stout back in 2005. Over the coming years they continued to expand, but by 2009 they'd outgrown this original brewery, and so they found a new premises and moved to the Landvetter the following year in 2010. The older brewery had a capacity at maximum output of 1500 hectolitres of beer per year, but the new brewery started off with a capacity of 8000 hectolitres per year, and this has been more than doubled in recent years. Over the years this brewery became very well known for their fruit and sour beers, and also for their Imperial stouts as well. That was what Dugas Bryggeri were all about in the beginning. I believe that the official name of this brewery for a long time was Dugas Ale ou Porto Bryggeri, but in recent times they've been doing a lot more IPAs. They've also invested quite heavily in their barrel aging program, the Future series basically, and they've been producing a vastly more diverse range of beers in comparison to what they used to do. Like I say, Dugas used to be all about the kind of big Imperial stouts like this and the kind of big fruity sours, but these days you can get some very, very interesting beer, very, very interesting IPAs from them, both on the West Coast series, the Bite series, and then you've got the Crush and the Fresh series, which are the different kind of hazy New England IPAs as well. But they're also one of the co-owners of the two brewers beer bars in Gothenburg, along with All In Brewing, who are one of the numerous gypsy breweries you'll find in the city, and I think that Electric Nurse Brewing are also one of the co-owners of these brewers' beer bars as well. And Electric Nurse is run by Mikael's daughter Ida along with her husband John, so they also produce some very nice beers. And if you go to the brewers' beer bars, I would recommend the Tredje Långgatan one, because that is the original one. You'll find a lot of really interesting beers from Dugas, Electric Nurse, and from All In, so those are definitely worth checking out if you get the chance. But like I say, Dugas Bryggeri, these guys have been around for a very long time, 15 years, which in Swedish terms that is quite a long time when it comes to the craft beer market. And like I say, they are one of the more established names when it comes to craft beer here in Sweden. One of my favourite breweries worldwide, I would say. So yeah, definitely worth checking these guys out if you get the chance. Probably the cult classic beers from these guys, it probably has to be the Tropic Thunder on the sour side of things, and then also the Egypt when it comes to the Imperial stouts. Like I said, I wish these guys would do a specific series for the Imperial coffee stouts, because the Key and the Sidamo Dimtu were just, top class beers, but I don't think we'll ever see those again, because they were collaborations with Hunter and Sons in Bristol in England, who are no more, unfortunately. But I would love to see an Imperial coffee stout series from Dugas with coffee beans from all over the world. That would be very, very interesting. But yeah, make sure you try the Egypt or the Tropic Thunder from Dugas. Those are probably two of the pinnacle beers that you'll find from these guys. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open up. As you can see, it is quite typical of what you would normally find from Dugas. There you can see on this one it has the Future Series symbol, which is quite nice. You can see it's a plain black bottle cap, as you usually get from Dugas. I wish they would, do a D, like put a D on it, or just write Dugas or something like that. I do wish that Dugas would have their own bottle caps here, but it tells you on the side here this one contains oats, rye as well, but it tells you a little bit about the beer on the side here as well. So it says, this is cognac and coffee. We brewed a coffee stout as part of a grand journey towards perfection, towards utopia. A canvas coloured with De Matteo coffee for any cup he needs. We let some of that beer rest on freshly emptied cognac barrels to enrich it even further, for any Avesi needs sipper. So yeah, this one I think should be quite cool. As I've told you before, they do have they've got quite a few different series of beers. There's the Grand Imperial Stouts, there is the series, the Bite series, which is the West Coast IPAs, and the Crush, which is the Crush, I think, the stronger New England IPAs, and they've also got the Fresh series as well, which is the slightly lower alcohol ABVs. I'm surprised they've not done one for the barley wines, although you will see some barley wines reviewed from Dugas Bryggeri quite soon. Yeah, this beer should be a little bit of a beast. A cognac barrel aged Imperial coffee stout. So yeah, As I've told you before, coffee beans are one of my favourite adjuncts to put in beer. You can see a nice little bit of smoke on the opening with this one. But coffee beans are one of my favourite adjuncts that you can put in beer. When it comes to coffee, there's various different variables at play there. It's usually all about the mazel, the metres above sea level at which the coffee is grown. The higher the altitude, the more kind of fruity, juicy and kind of citrusy things you get out of the coffee beans apparently. And of course you've got other factors in there such as where it's grown. Is it grown in Africa? Is it grown in South or Central America? The soil composition, the water composition, all of that is going to play a role when it comes to determining the flavour of your coffee beans. And then of course there's the roasting process, which is another variable in itself. But yeah, coffee beans are an awesome adjunct that give you a hell of a complexity to your different beers. As I mentioned earlier, cognac. Cognac is a type of brandy. Brandy is a distillate of wine, but the cognac brandies are basically specific to a certain location within France, from what I understand. And I've not had too much in the way of cognac or brandy, but I know that my good friend Remy at Beer Geek Holland, he is a little bit of a cognac fiend, so maybe I need to go and have a few cognac tasting lessons from him at some point. We'll need to see about that in the future. But like I said earlier, coffee imperial stouts is something something that Dougus Bryggeri we know do very well, but to find a cognac barrel aged one is very unusual. So I think this should make for a very interesting beer. But yeah, as you can see with this one, and as you would expect, it's poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. We'll get rid of the brewery notes now, but you can see that this one's poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour, which is what you would expect from an imperial stout. If we put the light through this, it is pretty much black as night. You do get a tiny little hint of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi Max coloured edge to this one, but again, that is very minimal. This beer is pretty much black as night. When this one comes in at 12.5%, you would kind of expect that. You know, the two things that determine the colour of your beer: one, it is the types of malt that you use, and two, it is the length of boil, because the longer you boil the beer, the higher caramelisation of sugars you get, and thus the darker the beer you have. And you know, imperial stouts like this are going to go through a boil of 4 or 5 hours, maybe even 6 hours, something like this. And this one, just when you sugar it about, you can see the lacing on the edge of the glass there, how long it takes to go back down. This beer has a very long boil, I'm pretty sure about that. So yeah, let's have a closer look at the aroma of this one and just see how we go on. Nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance. Lovely dark ebony rosewood colour and just a very thin foamy layer on the top. I would describe that as a kind of medium beige, kind of medium tan head on this one, and that's just left a very thin foamy layer around the edge of the glass. But for an imperial stout, that's not overly surprising. So yeah, when it's not got too much wheat in it, this stout, you're not going to expect it to retain too much of a head. When it's barrel aged and quite high alcohol as well, that's another thing that's going to contribute to the head just disappearing away. But let's have a closer look at the aroma of this one then and just see how we get on. Yeah, that's an awesome beer. I'm just going to say that straight away. You know, the thing is with Dougus Bryggeri, you know to expect a good beer with these guys, but it still never kind of ceases to amaze me how much complexity you can get out of these big imperial coffee stouts. One thing I'm going to say about this though is that the barrel aging thing in this beer is not immediately obvious. As I've said in previous reviews, I've always found that, barrel aging, when it comes to the mouthfeel, I've always found it thins out the beer a little bit. Quite often breweries will brew the beers to be a little bit thicker and boil it a little bit more basically to kind of compensate for that. But with the aroma on this one, this does smell more like a kind of straight up coffee stout, but just with a little bit more kind of fruitiness in it. So the barrel aging isn't immediately apparent in this one, but you can definitely smell a little bit of a kind of grapey you can definitely smell a little bit of that grapey and woody note in the background there on underneath the coffee. So yeah, the coffee note on this one is very interesting. So when you first take in the aroma of this beer, it's quite unusual. You can smell a very smooth kind of coffee blend in there, but you also have a really you can smell that woody grapey sort of thing underneath from the cognac. Where do we start with this beer then? So if we take the aroma in, yeah, I mean, when you take the aroma in quite deeply, you can smell a lovely, smooth, oaky woodiness to the beer. There is a little touch of it of vanilla in there as well, which is quite interesting. But yeah, lovely, smooth, quite slick, oaky base to the beer. You have a sort of how do you say? You do have a little bit. There is a wee touch of a kind of almost slightly spice to the wood, but yeah, the oaky smoothness there comes out really nicely. There's a wee touch of vanilla in there as well, but infused into that wood you get that lovely kind of slightly juicy, grapey sort of thing. It almost comes across as a mix between, you know, grapes and figs, to be honest with you. A lovely kind of smooth, juicy, figgy kind of quality. That's a really interesting aspect of the barrel aging side of this beer. It's you know, it's not immediately obvious. You have to take the beer in a little bit more deeply to get that. But the woody side of this beer, I think, is very, very interesting. The smoothness of it and that kind of almost red fruity, grapey sort of infusion into in it there as well. But on top of that, of course, you get the lovely coffee notes. For me, the coffee in this beer, it's got a lovely smooth roast to it. Definitely a kind of smooth roast. There's not too much earthiness to it, but you get a wee bit of that kind of more rough earthiness in the top of the nose. You can smell it's quite aromatic as well. There is a wee bit of aromaticity to that floral side of the beer, and there's a wee touch of a mix between red fruity and kind of citrusy notes out of the coffee here. But I do wonder if the red fruity side of this beer is coming from the fact that it's a cognac barrel aged beer. Yeah, the aroma out of this beer, I think, is really quite nice. It's the way the fruitiness and the wood kind of blend together in this one, because normally you would expect these to come out as separate entities, but the way that both of those kind of things mix together in this beer are really quite interesting, I have to say. So this one does get a big thumbs up from me in terms of how it goes together. I really like the aroma of this one. Lovely, smooth, earthy roast, but the earthiness does have a bit of kind of bite to it almost. You've got a nice little bit of aromaticity, and you've also got a wee bit of kind of as I say, you've also got a good little bit of a kind of red fruity note to the coffee in there as well, along with a little touch of citrusy note. So yeah, that's a really interesting point to make about this beer. Beyond that, you do get a wee bit of there is a wee bit of a kind of brown sugary note to this one, like a kind of like a sort of toasty caramel sort of thing. You do get a little bit of toasty caramel out of this one. I do get a wee bit of a kind of high cocoa chocolate as well, you know, a 70-80% cocoa chocolate. That's definitely in there. But otherwise, the malty sort of backbone of the beer is completely focused on the barrel aging and the coffee side of the beer. It's a bit difficult to detect anything else out of the aroma in this one. You might get a few kind of nutty notes out of the beer, in fairness, but yeah, everything is on the cognac and the coffee, which, you know, makes sense. That's why it's called that. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things, then let's look at that. I mean, you can detect a little bit of earthiness out of this one. I would guess that it's probably, you know, Summit or something like that that's been used as the hoppy side of this beer, but there is definitely a bit of touch of earthiness in there, a wee bit of floral aromaticity, a little bit of grassiness. When this is a barrel aged beer, most of the hoppy qualities or the green side of the hops are going to have dropped out of the beer. So yeah, I really like how that side of it goes together as well. I mean, when it's a barrel aged beer, you don't expect too much in the way of hoppy character, but usually you expect quite a bit of fruitiness. So let's look at that for the last bit, the aroma. So straight away with the beer, it's got quite a, it really has a lovely, it's got a very, the grapey notes almost come across as currants in a way. As I've said to you before, I've always found currants to be a little bit more juicy than berries. So there's quite a bit of a black curranty note to this beer. You've got the juiciness of a kind of red, kind of purpley type grape in this one as well. You can really detect that in this beer for me. So yeah, it's got a lovely kind of juicy note to it. There's a bit of figgy character in there. You get a wee bit of a kind of plummy, an oily plum to this one, a little bit of a sharp raisiny note as well. So yeah, the aroma out of this, the aroma that comes out of this beer on the fruity side of things, I think is very interesting. Figs, like I say, juicy kind of red and purpley grapes, a little bit of a kind of sharper raisin, juicy plum kind of note. Yeah, I really like how all of that goes together. The kind of The fruity notes out of this beer, I think, are very, very nice, and they complement the rest of the beer well. But the fruits, as I say, that you get out of this beer are quite, you know, that is definitely down to the sort of cognac barrel aging in this beer as well. So definitely one of the quirkier aromas I've come across from Dugas so far, and it definitely deserves a little bit of time to be pondered over. So make sure you do that if you try this beer. But we're going to taste this one now. So this one is the Cognac and Coffee, part of the Future series, the barrel aging project, coming in at an Imperial Stout coming in at 12.5% ABV from Dugas Bryggeri in Gothenburg, or in Landvetter near Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. Really curious about this. Let's get stuck in. Slanja, skål, cheers. I'm just going to say straight away, that's another ridiculous beer from Dugas. You know, these guys I think are getting really on form at the moment. The Punch Praline was an awesome beer. This one's ridiculously good. And you know, the Juicy Fruity or Fruity Juicy, I forget which way around the name was, the New England double IPA that I had from them recently, they thickened up the mouthfeel of that, and it was just really on point. You know, I think Dugas are in very, very good form at the moment. I'm curious to see what these two barrel aged barley wines are like that I have. But you know, Dugas I think are in very, very good form at the moment, and this is just another example. You know, this is why these guys are so highly regarded. So thumbs up to Dugas Bryggeri once again. This is why I really always keep an eye on what these guys are doing. Yeah, this one, this is something else. This has just got a ridiculous level of complexity to it. So yeah, straight away with this beer, you can feel that nice, smooth, kind of slick, oaky quality. That just blankets the middle of your palate there. What you'll notice with the woodiness is that it sort of almost wettens up a little bit and just kind of smooths out. It becomes a little bit slicker the further you go into the aftertaste, and you can feel that sort of, you can just feel that sort of slightly grapey, juicy note kind of sitting on top of there as well. And that, you know, middle third of your palate to back third of your palate, that really just kind of lingers there. As you move further forward onto the middle third of your palate, you do get a wee touch of a slightly vanilla note in there. On the front half of that middle third of your palate, sorry, you do get a wee touch of vanilla quality there. But it almost just feels as if the whole woody part of the beer, the oak, it's just infused with like a really kind of like an almost, can you say, essence of grape or something like that. It really, the fruitiness that you get out of the woody side of this beer is really interesting. It almost makes the wood just feel a little bit juicy, actually. As I say, I've probably drank cognac like once in my life, and probably brandy once or twice in my life. It's not something I would really do. You know, I love a Japanese sake. I do enjoy a whiskey every so often, and I review the beers here on the channel. That's, you know, as far as my kind of that's as far as my drinking goes, to be honest. But yeah, the way that the cognac barrel aging comes out in this one is really nice. It just gives you an almost juicy fruit, a very slight juicy fruitiness on top of the woody notes there. It's really interesting. Yeah. The woody side of this beer, I think, is really nice. It just this beer, it's interesting the way the coffee note comes out in this one, because you can feel the kind of coffee and roasty side of the beer. In some places it sits underneath the wood, but in other places it kind of sits on top as well. But yeah, the backbone of this beer is definitely that kind of smooth, woody character, actually. So I really like how this one goes together. Yeah. Definitely one of the more complex beers that we've had from Dugas in a time. But yeah, the backbone of the beer is that smooth wood with that kind of juicy, grapey sort of infusion into it there. And it's a little bit more vanilla-like as you go towards the front of that middle third of your palate there. So the coffee then, the coffee for the most part for me, it kind of sits on top of the woody note for me, and it sits from halfway in the middle third of your palate to halfway in the final third of your palate. You've got that lovely smooth coffee note out there, and it comes across with a lovely, very very smooth earthy roast. The aromaticity that I was getting out of the aroma, there's a little bit of that in this, but it's nowhere near as prominent as the aroma would have you believe. I do wonder if that's down to the barrel aging, to be honest with you. So yeah, the coffee barrel aging, I mean, the coffee side of this beer, you can feel that from that middle, it's almost on the borderline. You get a lot of the roasty toasty qualities of the coffee on that borderline between middle third and back third of your palate. You get a lot of that in a bit there, and it does actually have quite a strong earthiness to it, but it's quite a smooth roast as well. You do get a few aromatic notes out of it, and as you move further forward, almost to about the midpoint of the tongue, you will get a few kind of more red fruity notes, almost like black curranty type qualities coming out of this coffee as well, and that just kind of adds to the the kind of complexity of the beer. We did review the beer that was simply called Coffee from Dugas earlier, so this one is essentially just a cognac barrel aged version of that beer. I do remember that De Matteo coffee having a little bit of a kind of berryish quality to it, and yeah, you really do get a kind of black curranty. I don't know if I'd quite call it oily enough to be blackberry, but you really get a kind of black curranty note in the middle of your palate from the coffee in this one, so that's really interesting. As you move towards the back of that back third of your palate, you get a nice kind of roasty toasty earthiness out of the beer. You do get a wee bit of the black malt in there, but of course the barrel aging really just smoothens it out and gives you that very kind of infused sort of flavour there. If you go to the middle third of your palate, you've got some nice, you do get a little bit of brown sugar out of this one. You can feel a very kind of toasted caramel, and that almost sits just on top of the woody layer of the beer that we're talking about. It comes out a little bit more, particularly on the front half of that middle third of your tongue. But when it comes to chocolatey side of things, what do we get out of this? I mean, there is an element of chocolatiness to this one, but it comes across, as I say, on top of that woody note there. It does have a little, in the middle third of your palate in particular, you do get a wee bit of that kind of powdery high cocoa chocolate in there, a 70-80% powdery high cocoa chocolate in there just sitting on top. So yeah, it's a very layered beer, this one. There's a lot of really interesting things going on. I remember the original coffee had a bit more chocolate to it. It did have a good bit of a very kind of highly caramelised and very well toasted brown sugar to it as well. So the way this one's turned out is quite interesting. As I say, cognac barrel aging is not something you come across every day in craft beer brewing, but it's certainly given me a beer that I really need to think about a little bit. So yeah, I think this is probably going to be one of my more sort of rambly reviews, if you like, but I will tell you straight away, this is a lovely beer that you really should try. And the coffee, I think, the fruitiness of the coffee in this one, that more kind of black curranty element of the Di Matteo coffee in this one, I think really suits the kind of cognac barrel aging. So it's a good mix, actually. It definitely is a good mix. On the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness to the beer. As you move further forward, that earthiness just smoothens out a little bit. You do get a wee touch of floral aromaticity as you reach the front corners of the tongue, and as you go round the very front curve of the palate, the beer is just a little bit lighter and grassy, but you can detect a wee bit of earthiness just underneath the kind of fruity part of this beer as well. So I really like how that goes together in this one. The fruity side of this beer is quite interesting as well. So on that front third of your palate, you've got that nice oily bubble there where those juicy fruity esters just push their way out of the beer. So when you take this one in, initially you do get quite a little bit of a kind of raisiny sharpness out of the beer, but you also, as you progress further into the aftertaste with this one, you get a few other kind of things coming out of this one as well. Underneath that front third of your palate, you do get quite a roasty, toasty kind of note out of the beer. It's almost like if you have that kind of well-fired edge of a cake, it's got a little bit of that almost kind of Christmas puddingy sort of thing to it sitting under the front third of the palate. A little bit of that kind of pruny, datey sort of thing, and as I say, a little bit like Christmas pudding, to be honest with you. So yeah, when you take that beer in, juicy raisins at the back of that front third of your palate, a little bit of a kind of more oily, kind of plummy flavour. As you move further forward, you start to get a wee bit of a kind of juicier figgy note there, but like I say, you've got these datey, pruny, dry, cakey sort of flavours kind of pushing their way out. The front third of your palate actually does get a little bit drier with this one, but then as you reach the front half of that front third of your tongue, the front sixth of your tongue if you want to be pernickety, you do get those more oily, blackcurranty notes out of this one, the more blackberry notes. So there's a wee bit of the sharper blackberry, but the very juicy blackcurrant, I think, kind of forms the backbone of this one. And the grapey notes from the barrel aging, I think, really push their way out in the aftertaste as well. This is just a very, very quirky beer, and I've got very few things that I can think of to compare this one to. So this is one that I would really just say, taste it for yourself and see what you think. I think the Cognac barrel aging is really, really quirky in this one. The original coffee beer is a very good one, and this, you know, this is maybe one of the kind of downsides to the Systembolaget system, if you like. It would be awesome to have this in a 2-pack. You know, take the original coffee beer that they have and, you know, age it in different barrels. You know, do a bourbon barrel one, do a Scotch whisky one, do a cognac one, a rum barrel one. You know, release this as like a 4-pack or something and do that. But, you know, Systembolaget doesn't really allow you to do that. Because the cognac, as I say, the quirk factor with this one is the cognac barrel aging. So this would be a really interesting, if you got a bottle of this and a bottle of the regular one and then did a side-by-side with a friend or something like that, that would be a really interesting thing to do with this beer. But you know, as it stands with the way Systembolaget works, you have to accept it at face value. It's a beautiful beer, but this one for me is quite an education. It really shows what cognac barrel aging can do, and it's a very fruity barrel aging that you get out of this one. The flavour that really comes out of this beer for me in the aftertaste is quite sultana-like. You know, these kind of the dried sort of white grapes, the dried green grapes. It's really like that. I do get quite a bit of sultana just evolving out of the palate in this one the further you go into the aftertaste. But of course you do have the coffee lingering there and a bit of the chocolate and brown sugar and stuff like that. That sort of Christmas puddingy flavour. All of that's there. But for me, you really do get quite a kind of sultana type flavour just evolving off the palate of this one. So thumbs up to Dugas for this one once again. Again, these guys have produced a beer that's really made me think a little bit, and it's beautifully done, so you have to take your hat off to them for that. But yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel then, I would say that this is top end of mid-bodied, bottom end of full-bodied. Carbonation's very smooth in this one. It's quite a slick mouthfeel. As I've said to you before, when it comes to barrel-aged beers, I think the mouthfeel drops off a little bit to give you these more infused flavours. In terms of bitterness, I think this is going to be a 70-ish, maybe 80 IBU beer, both due to the coffee and due to the other kind of hoppy and malty elements that the beer has. There's a slight degree of sweetness to it. It's got some lovely juicy fruity esters in there as well. It's just a lovely, lovely beer, this one, and I would recommend that you try this if you get the chance. I think there's a lot of kind of really interesting elements to this beer. This is definitely one of my more kind of rambly reviews that I've done, but it's a lovely beer, and I think probably I would go as far as saying that this is probably one of the most complex ones that I've come across from Dugas so far, and that's quite a statement to make for them, because these guys do some crazy stuff. But yeah, this is definitely one of the beers that's really tested my palate, and I've really enjoyed tasting this one for you here on the channel. So yeah, I apologise for not giving you such a good review of this one, but it is a beer that is difficult to compare to anything else, to be honest. But it is beautiful, I would say, and you have to try this for yourself and just see how you get on. So we'll leave it at that for this. This one was the Cognac and Coffee, a 12.5% Cognac barrel-aged Imperial Coffee Stout from Dugas Bryggeri in Landvetter on the outskirts of Sweden. A beautiful, beautiful beer, 12.5% Imperial Stout. one that I think you really just need to try for yourself. It really shows you what cognac barrel aging can do, and that's not something that you're going to see every day. But yeah, thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Dougus Bryggeri. We will return to these guys at some point fairly soon. And I would recommend that you check these guys out. 1 for Imperial coffee stouts, and 2 for the IPAs and sour fruit beers and things like that. The Egypt and the Tropic Thunder are the 2 beers that you really want to check out if you haven't tried anything from these guys in the past. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, and do make sure you check out Dougus Bryggeri, one of the most respected names when it comes to Swedish craft beer as well. Slanja, skål, cheers, and thanks for watching.